Hey guys, how's it going? Born Ready here, returning to Total War Warhammer 40k with some brand new gameplay and a detailed breakdown of ranged combat, and the brand new systems coming to Total War for 40k specifically. In this video, we're breaking down Total War's recent livestream, in which we finally got a complete start to finish battle between the Orks and the Astra Militarum, 2.5 times over. Now, it's worth saying these are the exact same forces we saw battle in the Bilibili showcase about 2 weeks ago, being replayed by one of the devs, while commentary is provided by the team. So while it's technically new gameplay, it's the same map and units. But what we got here was a really solid breakdown of how ranged combat has evolved for Total War 40k. Everything from being able to strafe while firing, down to individual squad compositions having very real and varied loadouts between individual members, which is only scratching the surface of all we've learned here. If you're looking for more information on this game after the video, be sure to subscribe or check out my channel for breakdowns and information releasing. And one more point before we dive in. The devs have clearly stated that this build is 2 months old and is not final. Everything you're seeing is still being actively developed and nothing is final here. They're seeking feedback to continue to improve on it, so remember to sign up to the beta if you're as keen as I am. I've put that link to their sign up page in the description. Now, let's dive in, starting off where every battle does, in the deployment zone. The first thing to notice here as we zoom over the forces is the fact that in Total War, you are limited in where you can deploy your troops. Traditionally, you start on the opposite side of the map to your opponent and can only deploy within a certain area, which is that faint white line you can see along the front of the main guard forces. Those two units further afield will have vanguard deployment, which allows them to start deeper into the battlefield to try and get a jump on or scout out the enemy advance. We were then shown something new to Total War, the reserves option, which we know will function a little differently based on your faction selection. Reserves are units that do not start on the battlefield, but can be brought in throughout a match to bolster your forces, with an indication on that bar at the top of the screen showing how many units sit in reserves via that shaded line. The specific panel on the screen is a placeholder and shows the player deploying a unit and then pulling it back into reserves quite quickly. Later in the match, we see the dev calling units from off-field using that same menu to set up a second defensive line to hold the Orks. For the main guard forces, their reserves enter from the side of the map, while we know Space Marines will be able to drop forces deeper into the battlefield through the use of drop pods. So there is some nice faction flavor here that's lore accurate, given a guardsman is not surviving that fall, so can't do the same. This is a big change for the franchise, as in past Total War titles, your reserve or reinforcement units would simply enter at a set time and location during the match, without your ability to dictate the exact moment and location. I really like this for the Guard as a faction that is on the squishy side. Being able to watch your front line falter and build a second line from reserves presents interesting tactical options, as those in reserve units are protected until they are deployed, so they can't be damaged. In this instance, the player chose not to start with a full force on the field and keep some of those units in reserve, which is an interesting choice. Looking further into the UI, we also got more detail on the use of off-map artillery and ordnance through the bombardments menu, as well as the regimental orders on the right above the minimap, which are again placeholder menus for the time being. Those top options are your bombardments, which are limited use. This player had access to the Deathstrike Godspear warhead, Lance Strike, which is that massive laser shot from orbit we've seen in the past, and again further into this video. And finally, the Valkyrie Rocket Pod Barrage, great for tearing apart infantry. Then we have the regimental orders, also referenced by one of the commentators as army abilities. I assume because other factions will have their own versions of this, but as we'd expect, the Orks probably wouldn't name them regimental orders. The purpose of these effects are to bolster your own forces. While bombardments are aimed at the enemy, these orders give your troops temporary bonuses. Here we saw Take Cover, which increases evasion and resistance to suppression. Next is Take Aim, which increases accuracy and armor piercing. And finally, Move, which makes things move faster. This only works for units in range of a Vox Caster, which are command units, one of which we will see a little bit later, which encourages players using this faction to ensure their guardsmen are within range of a commander or command unit to be able to take this effect on, which as I understand is similar to the tabletop. Now, with deployment over, the match begins, and this raises something really interesting, which is how Fog of War is implemented. With larger built-up maps as opposed to the open fields and wooded areas from past titles, we are seeing an increase in the impact of Fog of War in this title. This is a well-known tactical layer for Total War that has in essence been elevated here, as buildings and cover create disruptions to sightlines that previously would have been completely open. You can see from the gameplay that the Orks really don't enter the player's vision until both sides get to the river, and even then the Orks on the road come into view easily, while those moving through the ruins nearby take a little longer to be seen. This gives you more tactical options. You could sit back and pick off cover with your heavy vehicles and artillery, or bulldozer over it, which we see the Orks do a few times through the stream. This may have not been the best showcase for it, as they are focused on showing off the ranged gameplay, but this could have allowed some Orks, if managed by a player and not the AI, to swing really wide and essentially flank the guardsmen if positioned differently. I reckon we'll see some really diverse tactics develop within multiplayer as players begin to understand how units could move more effectively through maps, using and destroying cover, which I think will breathe some new life into the multiplayer scene. I, for one, often dropped off Total War multiplayer early because most battles were just two forces on the opposite end of a soccer pitch, but here it's a lot more dynamic. And much of that is down to the next point raised, which is how cover functions. Now, we have seen this shown off already. Cover is fairly dynamic in Total War 40k, with craters from explosives, ruins, and terrain itself allowing cover for units, which can be destroyed and obviously in some ways created as the battle unfolds. But a piece of key information is that cover zones, even when destroyed, will continue to provide some minor bonuses. The devs highlighted that this is to allow players confidence in knowing a troop in cover has some protection and remove the need for them to closely inspect each unit's cover every second through a match if it is being blown up to try and figure out if it's still there, damaged, or entirely gone. The point is, you as a player will know that even if cover is altered during a match, the units you place there will continue to gain some level of bonus even if it's diminished. I think that's a good approach personally. A level of micro is important here, but if you're managing tons of units and seeing explosions everywhere, cover shouldn't be the one thing you're constantly looking at to maximize your force. Positioning across the field is more important. They are seeking feedback on that, however, from the closed beta, so it is still being finely tuned. And this next piece is honestly equally as game-changing, which is the ability for all ranged units to strafe, essentially firing while moving. This one is going to take some balancing, so good luck to CA, as each unit will have a varying level of success when strafing, based on their expected skills. To explain that, units like the Guardsman forces will be able to fire while moving with a penalty to their accuracy. This includes the ability to move while walking backwards, forwards, and to the side, so full movement where that's possible, whereas a tank on tracks will need to align their tread in the direction they need to go. Space Marines, on the other hand, being elite trained forces, won't suffer a penalty to accuracy at all to mark the difference between them and their significant level of strength over regular forces. Absolutely insane power for those units. And finally, from the first battle shown, we got to look at how unit models change over the course of a battle. CA have really outdone themselves here if what they're presenting really comes through, as they have apparently created damaged variants of unit models, but fielding largely guardsmen worked against them when they tried to show this off. The main one shown here was the Baneblade tank, which got heavily scorched and chipped by bullets through the match, which shows. The devs highlighted that finding a damaged guardsman was a challenge, as the damaged ones usually get taken out very quickly because they are squishy, whereas Space Marines will come away from a fight looking worse for wear, with burns, cuts, blood, or other damage sustained during the match showing on their armor. It doesn't have any impact on the fight itself, but is a nice touch for those who like to get up close during a match, or those who like to shoutcast Total War battles and come in with some sweeping camera shots. That brings us to the end of the first battle shown. Moving into the next, the first point of discussion was on unit cards, as 40k is introducing squads that aren't always made up of just a single type of unit, which means squads like the Kassakin, which are made up of individuals with hot-shot las guns, which are rapid fire, as well as specialists with slower firing plasma weapons. It was implied that decisions you make during the campaign will alter those weapon selections and specializations for your troops to gear those units towards taking on various other squad types, such as infantry or vehicles. As we looked deeper at the Kassakin unit card, CA have given us a good amount of detail here. For example, you can see the unit's performance against light, medium, and heavy units, light being something like a guardsman, medium being something like a space marine, and heavy being the Baneblade and larger mechanical units. They did say that some units break that mold, but about 80% of units should fit nicely within those categories, with those categories then advising you on how much damage and how successful a unit will be against another unit type. Then, digging deeper into the more advanced stats, that's where you can see the weapon types equipped by the squad itself, as well as the overall makeup of the squad. We can see this group, for example, have Voxcasters. So again, they are a command unit which can make use of those regimental orders and give those to units in range. And finally, they have a couple of sergeants and specialists. Now, the devs did say that this is one of the more complex units they're showing here. You shouldn't expect to see all squads having multiple roles in them, but it highlights that within a unit card, you may actually have multiple weapons at play, and you may actually have individuals within a squad with access to more than one weapon. In that instance, the character will swap between the weapons at will when the context arises, but will generally prefer what is needed for the task. So they would switch to a weapon proficient in damaging light infantry against guardsmen, and then switch to the plasma rifle when taking on a medium threat. This is actually quite strong, and will make specializations of units a key feature to consider. This is an expansion of the paper, scissors, rock mechanic we see in strategy and RTS titles, and really demonstrates how these developers aren't just half-arsing their way through implementing 40k in their Total War systems. They are actually building them to meet the needs of the universe they are adapting. They did briefly look over at the Commissar and his squad as well to talk through stats like evasion. Evasion is purely your chance to dodge a shot. If you're in cover, it's increased, which is pretty basic and well-known information. You essentially are better off in cover than out, as it can cause shots to miss you. There are some clips at the end of this video that show off the benefits of cover quite well, so stay tuned for those. Which led nicely into how projectiles are handled in the new engine. And this one does bring me some concern for optimization, because every single bullet, las shot, or projectile is simulated in-game, with hundreds, if not thousands, being managed at once in a single battle. I mean, there's a lot happening in general, so this is maybe more so a cherry on top, but it's a lot to manage and may have an impact on lower end machines, which is my concern. I'm sure we'll hear more about that in the closed beta, as this was a common comment on my last video with some people concerned about optimization, but we can only wait and see on that one. Now, the benefit to this is that with every projectile being simulated, you can have really interesting interactions with cover and units being intercepted by them. The devs even commented that the storm boys we saw flying in and then being obliterated are themselves projectiles. They can shoot off into cover and cause damage to it when killed, or even other infantry. That's a really nice touch, and while it's not going to win you a match, it adds some really nice depth. And the depth just keeps on coming, because now that they've simulated projectiles, they've also looked into how those projectiles leave the unit they are attached to. Projectiles will be impacted by a unit's rate of fire, which is pretty obvious, the speed of the projectile they're firing, as well as how many shots are left in their magazine or weapon equivalent. This all likely sounds pretty basic, but it is a much deeper level of detail than we've seen in Total War before. The devs highlighted that previously a burst fire weapon would need to finish off a certain cycle of bursts before the unit could move to the next action, while here in 40k, the unit will begin by lining up to take their shot. They will then take the shot, take time to recover from the recoil, which will obviously differ based on the unit, before firing again. And they'll continue that until they need to reload. So a guardsman in cover, let's say, shoots 19 of 20 shots. After the 20th, he'll need to reload before continuing. If he leaves the fight after firing 19 shots, moves to cover and quickly re-engages, he'll begin again by taking aim and fire that last shot before needing to reload. In practice, this isn't something many players will notice and isn't something you need to pay close attention to in a match, as we did get confirmation later that if a unit is out of combat, they will reload any missing rounds, which is something they are still implementing as a dev team. This also feeds into firing lines though, as you may have noticed that type groupings of guardsmen will not fire over each other. The devs broke this down that each unit is constantly assessing its fire lines. If it can see an enemy without obstruction, it will fire, so your first two lines of guardsmen should be perfectly fine. But those in the third row or further back will be unable to fire without hitting an ally if somebody's standing in the way. But not if an enemy flanks. Those on the sides will then be able to fire if an enemy comes around them. So this is dynamic, and for those unfamiliar with Total War, you have control over how you spread your troops, so you can minimize the chance of them being bunched like this. You can spread them out wider or keep them bunched together. This is important because they put a lot of effort, as they say, into ensuring that small pieces of cover, small bits of terrain and the like don't interrupt firing lines. We've all been there, No matter if it's an FPS, an RTS, or a turn-based game where a character looks like it should be in the open for your shot, but you just can't land it, or you can't fire at them at all because of an odd terrain bug. The devs are really hoping that through the closed beta, they can continue to fine-tune this to ensure the game is feeling responsive and accurate to players. This, to me, really highlights again the significant level of detail CA are achieving here, and that they are simulating an exceptional amount of detail in an attempt to capture the tabletop experience. Rather than simply making 40k fit their usual standard, they're instead pushing that standard up to accommodate 40k. Now, on to the final battle, which to be fair was about only half a battle before the devs skipped past into those final scenes at the end. It's here the devs began breaking down the concept of suppression and flanking, and how this impacts on your units. But none of this is final when it comes to the specifics of how much of an impact suppression has on a unit, and they're looking for info from the beta to help with that, so we don't take away the very specifics from this. Suppression is a mechanic in the game that takes place whenever you're firing on a unit that is out in the open. Those orc boys slowly crossing open plains while guardsmen fire down on them are being suppressed, for example. A suppressed unit will suffer reductions to their movement, increasing based on the amount of fire they are taking. This obviously doesn't impact all units in the same way. A group of guardsmen won't be suppressing a tank through ranged fire, although other units can, and some units will be designed to avoid this mechanic altogether. Returning to that rock, paper, scissors way of thinking, in which you need the right tool for the right job. But essentially, you want to avoid being out in the open and just taking open fire whenever possible. The next topic raised was flanking, and that won't be a surprise to Total War veterans, with flanking fire being used for ranged units in this entry. If a unit is taking shots from multiple directions, they will be considered flanked. This is a strong mechanic in Total War, although I suppose it's a strong mechanic in war in general, and rewards good positioning. This status in particular has a strong impact on unit morale, which is a unit's metric that determines how long they will stay in the fight. If a unit loses all of their morale in Total War, it routs, running to the edge of the map to escape the battle and ultimately leave if it doesn't rally and return. Morale can be reduced or increased through a number of different metrics, such as the loss of a commander or being flanked. Thankfully, if a unit is flanked or suppressed, you will see that on the unit card at the bottom of the screen, as well as those text pop-ups you've seen through the footage, so it's obvious to you when it does happen. Generally though, don't run straight into the enemy's defensive line if you can handle it, and if they're flanking, they've probably got the upper hand and you need to reconsider your positions. Now that largely wraps up the major pieces, but there were some remaining clips shown that demonstrate the usefulness of cover and how efficient it can be, which I'll let run here. The first is honestly a great example of how effective cover is, and how units may strafe fire at enemies before they get routed. But remember, the strafe firing units are you suffering from reduced accuracy. The second clip shows how different weapon types can impact cover differently, with the units in cover firing slowly and those who are approaching using flamers to absolutely burn them out, showing that cover isn't a win condition. And there is a great clip in here of a Baneblade absolutely tearing through some Orc boys that demonstrates how turrets on the vehicle can shoot independently from one another, sweeping the ranks and taking them apart, which is coming up. All in all, this livestream really answered some key questions for me, specifically about how they have changed the landscape to meet 40k. This is quite the update for CA. I appreciate they've put a lot of thought into how to make their existing systems work for this IP, and that they are willing to get into the detail down to individual units needing to manage how many shots are left in their magazines, or equivalent. Some info we got in the little Q&A at the end is that Commander or Lord units in this series will not always be the powerhouses we've previously seen. You won't see a Guardsman, Lord, or Commander single-handedly taking on packs and packs of Orcs like we see in the Fantasy Total War series, because they want a more grounded approach. And that many will be backed up by an elite bodyguard or squad, as we saw in this footage, to help bolster them as a unit. But it does sound like you'll need to pay them closer attention and be more careful in their use. We also learn that vehicles, when exploding, do have some minor splash damage. So if you happen to have units around a tank when it's destroyed, they will feel the impact. And we got a good look at how high ground can impact projectiles significantly. I am loving the look of the tactical positioning, the importance of cover, the increased fog of war that's coming from simply how built up this map is in particular. It sounds like this entry into the series is really going to shake things up. It's still Total War, it's not turning into another game, but it's definitely adding layers of complexity that I appreciate. One of my only gripes with past titles is that some battles feel like two armies facing each other on an open field. This, on the other hand, looks much more dynamic. It It also feels and looks the way a battle plays out could change rapidly from minute to minute as new sightlines and cover options appear and disappear. I'm keen to hear your thoughts though. I appreciated all of you who commented and took the time to watch my last Total War 40k video. Thank you very much. Let me know below this one. What mechanic are you liking most from this? For me, that ability to strafe for essentially all range units is such a game changer. Being able to slowly pull your firing line backwards against an Ork advance is so clutch. The devs did comment that factions with a greater melee focus won't be completely outmatched here. This isn't a win button for those with ranged options, but it makes the battles feel so much more alive, and I just really need to see a Space Marine squad running and gunning down some Orks. The fact that they don't lose accuracy because they're actual Space Marines is just so cool. It just really grounds the world, it increases the immersion, and I cannot wait to see it. Remember guys, the beta sign up link is in the description if you haven't already signed up yourself. There is also the QR code on screen, but I'm unsure how long that remains active, so you could also give that a shot. And we will be seeing more Total War 40k at Gamescom in late August, so we got to keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, that's it from me today. Thank you very much for watching. If you'd like to support me, hitting that like button is literally the best thing you can do. Sub for more content in the future. Come hang out in my streams every Tuesday and Thursday, 6 PM Australian Eastern Standard Time, right here on YouTube and Twitch. And finally, if you have a deep love for 40k games, consider subbing for updates on a long-form video project I plan to announce in the coming weeks, looking back on the titles that make up the video game adaptations of this universe and how they fit or don't fit into the lore. Until then, thank you very much. Have a good one, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.